It's ready.
Hold on, I want to move it around this way. This is an interview with Edna Klingman for the Valley Historical Project. The interviewers are Harriet Blockus, assisted by Ken Blockus. Also in attendance is Karen Klingman, and the date is March 2nd, 1998, and we're at the Klingman home. We want to thank you, Edna, for granting us this interview. The material will be used to further disseminate and interpret the heritage of our region. It will be primarily used for educational purposes, but may also be used in promoting economic development and tourism. Okay, Edna, you want to give us your maiden name?
Edna Moulton.
And where were you born?
Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
And when?
August 20th, 1910.
And both your parents were born in the United States?
Right.
So you didn't have any relatives that immigrated to the United States?
No.
Okay. Can you tell us where you received your high school education?
West Union High School.
And when did you graduate from there?
1927.
And you have been married. Can you tell us who you married and when?
Married Edward Klingman, August 7th, 1943.
Okay. And what church have you been affiliated with?
Methodist.
All your life?
All my life.
Okay. And can you tell us about where you have lived for your residencies? Or different places. You were born in Wisconsin and you graduated from high school in West Union, and then you started living in Elgin in the 50s?
55 we moved here.
Okay, and can you tell us where you have lived?
I lived in Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
No, in Elgin.
Oh! We started down here in this old brick house that was torn down.
From the flood?
From the flood.
Where Ryersons lived?
Right. We
Okay.
lived there 6 months till we found something. Then we lived upstairs over the lower tavern.
Okay.
And and behind the Winger Tavern.
Okay.
And then we moved to this locality.
Do you remember when you moved to this house?
November 1st, 1965.
Good memories here. Okay, and then you've lived there ever since.
Right.
Okay. Now, can you tell a little bit about your husband? What kind of work he did?
Well, he worked for Kohler, and he worked for Mel Kohler and Fred Berg in the clothing business until he went, and then he was down to lived in Ottumwa and worked at the Des Moines Register under Cliff Keipel. And then we moved here and
Went into service.
oh yeah, and then he went into service.
Okay. All right. Do you have any memories, Edna, of your, just if I said, what do you remember about your childhood? What comes to your mind? Take your time. Did you have a favorite toy, or do you remember something favorite about a Christmas or anything like that?
Well, I did an awful lot of playing with dolls, and I always liked to sew. I used to sew for my dolls even when I was real small.
Did you really?
And I just...
Did you have any special doll?
No, not really.
But dolls were very important. That's what girls got for Christmas.
That's right. And one of my special friends in West Union and I was... we used to play house an awful lot. We'd take our dolls out for walks. Oh, we had a big time.
Because in those days, your goal was to be a mother and a housekeeper, and to a certain extent.
I think so.
Okay. Now, after you left high school, did you start in a job right away? You talked about the telephone company.
Well, that was, I worked in a grocery store for a while, and then I worked in a drugstore and for a while, but that was the main thing, you know. And I always wanted to teach school. I had taken normal training, and but I wasn't old enough when I graduated, or when I graduated to teach. So I
How old were you when you graduated?
16.
Oh, wow. Didn't you go to kindergarten?
17.
17.
They didn't have kindergarten then.
Okay, that's interesting to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so you worked in a grocery store and
then I worked at the drugstore.
At the drugstore. Now, when did you start working for Northwestern Bell Telephone Company?
'29, yeah.
In 1929. And where was that? In West Union?
West Union.
In West Union. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like working for the telephone company? What was your job?
Well, I worked as an operator at the switchboard.
What did you say when you answered?
Number, please.
Okay.
And then I was transferred out to the commercial department, and I was a bookkeeper.
Oh, you became a bookkeeper. That's kind of in the family then, being your daughter did many years of bookkeeping too.
Oh, and I worked there 8 years.
8 years.
So
Total 16.
Total 16 years for the telephone company.
Okay. Do you remember any funny things happening when you were an operator? Did you ever get in on any particular conversation or mix-ups, or did you ever hear anything you shouldn't have? Or
no, I don't really think. We just watched our signals, and we just. I can't remember anything particular.
You were very professional.
I have tried to be.
Do you feel nowadays? Do you feel like the telephone is more private?
Oh, well, of course, that was the thing that people complained about. We didn't have any competition because I worked for Northwestern Bell, and it's entirely different. The telephone service is entirely different than it was then.
Now
you had old hand phones. They had to ring for the operator. And
do you remember your phone in your own home at that time? What was your ring?
They had every 4-party line had our number was 2J,
mm-hmm.
and they had J and M and X and Y on those. I'm not sure about that Y, but then I think that's.
And you had a ring like you had 2 longs and a short or something.
And for rural.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to be careful about what you said on the phone? Did you have people on your party that listened?
Well, they could listen, but I don't think we ever had any trouble with it.
Good, you were lucky.
Of course, rural lines I can remember sometimes we'd have to, when we were trying to call for someone, we had a toll call or something, we'd say, will you please hang up so that I can get my call through, because it wouldn't ring, of course, if somebody had taken the receiver down.
You think people talked a longer time in those days, being they didn't get away from home as much?
Oh, I don't know. Some of them would be quite a long time. And we had signals when they were through, and the little light signals came on.
So you knew they were
we'd
done.
Take down the connection then.
And so you worked for Northwestern Bell, and you were on Bell all your life until now the company has been sold. See, what do you have now, Ace?
Alpine.
Alpine.
Mm-hmm.
We're on. Okay. Okay, then let's move on. And when you came in the 1950s, you bought a business here. Could you tell a little bit about it?
Well, of course, Ed had worked for Mel and Fred Berg before he went into service, and we lived in Tama, and he just decided that he would like to come back to Elgin, so we contacted Mel and asked if he would be interested in selling. He said I would to local people, and and he said he would be glad to help out. We just happiest years of my life.
Yes. I bought many things from you through the years, and I still miss it because you always got the small sizes. Of course, I'm not so small anymore. Could you tell us a little bit about what the store had, what kind of things you sold when you first started?
Well, we kind of had what you'd call a family store. We handled children's stuff, and we handled ladies and men's, and it was really a family store.
You could even get a suit or a hat.
Oh yes, hats. Ed always wore a hat.
I remember that.
Ed and Frosty Welch.
They had to advertise their own business, right?
Well, I guess that might have been the idea, but just always that way. $3.98 when we first went in there, and Ed said, "I'll never mark them up to over $5." And so I marked them up to $4.98, but they really exploded afterwards, and I guess they're just terrifically high now.
Now I don't know if the tape picked that up, Karen. We're going to have you speak up a little louder, but you were talking about overhauls, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you give her, it's okay. Just say it a little louder, so we'll be sure and pick it up. Okay. That seems cheap, doesn't it? Now you can pay $50, anywhere from $25 to $50 for a pair of jeans. Do you have any idea what some of the other items might have cost, like a dress or a suit? That would, even then in that time.
You mean, are you calling about selling price?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we handled, we handled kind of what we used to think of as house dresses. And that was the cheaper line, of course, and they sold for $5.95 at that time. And then the better dresses, we just varied the price according to the cost, So
it's suits then around men's suits were around in the 30s.
Yeah.
$30 in that area.
Okay.
$30.
What do you think brought about the biggest changes so that small clothing stores weren't as successful?
Well, we noticed when all these, like Walmarts and Kmart's came in, we felt the need. In fact, that we knew that it was time to get out, and because we couldn't compete with that.
You could see the handwriting on the
Yeah,
wall.
that's right.
That the competition
Yeah.
where they could buy things and sell it in mass amounts.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people really enjoyed the small clothing store. I often hear people say, that they wish they could go to Klingman's.
I wish I could too.
And you always had such nice small, when I was a small size, you always had small sizes. And Ken always got me a dress for...
I can always remember Ken coming in at Christmas time and asking me if I'd pick out something for you. Quite this.
And you did a good job.
Oh, I loved every minute of it.
Now I wonder, when you came in the 50s, well, first I'll ask this. When you lived in West Union, do you have any... Oops, okay. Do you have any... Do you have any memories when you were living in West Union of early Elgin before you moved here?
Well, the only connection I had with Elgin, I really didn't know a great deal about the town, but Elgin was what we called an agency exchange of the telephone company, and I sometimes came down here for it when Leota and Arlie were working in the telephone office.
Could you tell me what their last names were?
Oh, Leota Welch and Arlie Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so Arlie was one of the first persons I knew really in Elgin.
How did you happen to know her?
Through the telephone office.
Oh, okay. Did she work?
She was an operator.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
And
that.
so was Leota Welch.
And the telephone office was located above where the bank is now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the telephone office above the bank. All right. Now, when you came in here in the 50s, what was the town like compared to now?
It was real thriving. It really was a complete town. We had a doctor, we had a dentist, and pharmacy.
Okay. If you went up and down the street, we had a produce, gas station, we had a car dealership, and we had a pharmacy. We had 2 restaurants at the time.
I think you had about 3 grocery
We
stores.
had 3
Right.
grocery stores. We had the Locker, Bob's Grocery, Harold Halverson, uptown,
And then we had
Thomas.
Thomas
Thomas store.
right
that's
next to us.
And something you had something that we don't have now anymore.
Blacksmith shop, Bill
Yes.
Mosier.
Yes, he made the wagons and the liquor store.
That's right.
Yeah.
We also had a jewelry store at that time.
Yeah.
Yes,
Olsen's.
because I know Ken.
It was really a complete, complete little
Variety
town.
store.
Variety store.
Always
And you had now we had the canning factory. Can you tell what your memory a little bit about the canning factory?
I really didn't know
Well, it brought, it was a good occupation for seasonal work. And it was, most of the corn at that time was locally grown.
And a lot of women would get money to put their kids into school by working
Right.
at the canning factory.
That's right. And it was also a good place for college students to earn some extra money in their summertime, and some high school students if they're old enough.
And you remember what they did? Corn, and they also did.
They did some asparagus at one time.
Okay. And of course, that canning factory is no longer with us anymore. When they started freezing corn instead of canning it, but it really a lot of people worked there.
Oh yes, everybody looked forward to being able to work there in vacation time.
Once.
Do you remember a couple bad things about the canning factory?
Well, the smell, I suppose, odor.
And then I also remember when I came here to teach, there were a lot of what we said. We knew the canning factory was going.
Oh, the Mexicans.
Yes, but I don't know if that was necessarily. But I was thinking of the flies.
Oh,
Yeah, fly season, huh?
Fly season.
yeah.
I don't think it's in the early days of the canning factory there were Mexicans. That was more toward
That was after we were here.
That was more for asparagus too, I think.
Yeah.
asparagus.
Mhm.
Okay. Now we also had something else that's no longer here, and that was the hatchery, Capper's Hatchery.
Yes.
Do you remember anything about that?
Not.
Well, I do. I used to go over and get baby chicks
Okay.
and bring them home.
Yeah.
Okay.
They lasted until Mom knew I had them.
Ken.
They usually went out about the next day then. I used to put them in a little box and put them in our entry room in the house. And of course, living in town, that wasn't really the proper place, I'm sure. But I used to go over there almost every spring for several years. Mary Clothier worked there as a bookkeeper at the time. I was usually there when I go get them.
And it did, again, it provided a lot of jobs for people.
They looked
Right.
forward to it.
And a lot of people came into town. I remember when I came here in the 50s to teach school, my parents said, oh, yes, we've gone there to buy chickens and baby chicks. And do you remember how if people didn't want to come to get the chicks, how they got them to the person who bought them? Do you remember that?
I don't for sure.
Through the post.
Post office?
Mailed them out, didn't
Off
they?
again?
Are we done that already?
Is that a 60-minute tape? Or?
They used it at the, they would do it at the post office.
Yeah, that's probably
Yeah,
right.
they did mail them out.
And they would mail them out, and the post offices got kind of sick of that, you
Mhm.
know. Okay. Do you remember anything about that was fun to do either when you lived in West Union or after you came to Elgin for entertainment?
They always had band concerts down in the park.
Did you enjoy that?
Yes, that was because open nights they just really flocked into town. Just it's Wednesday night and Saturday nights were open nights. And just the farmers they look forward to bringing the families and come to town and on Wednesday nights they can listen to band concerts.
Both nights.
And am I wrong? Did Ed play in a band?
No,
But they did have a local band. Do you remember anything about that local band that they always talk about?
The little German band?
Yes, the German band.
Oh.
Do you remember? Did you ever hear that German band?
oh yes,
Cliff Christ,
yeah.
Gordon Mosby, Ernie Baumgartner.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you remember anything about what kind of music they played or anything?
There's some polka music in there.
I'm
Yeah.
sure they had some Swiss.
They did play they had the little Swiss band.
Okay. Do you remember, like they always said the Norwegians were on one side of the river and the Swiss on the other side of the river. Do you remember anything about anything that the Norwegians did or the Swiss did or they didn't do together, or that wasn't something you were involved
Top
in?
priority at the time.
Because you weren't Norwegian and you weren't Swiss, right?
I guess that's right.
Okay. Why did you want to stay in this area?
Well, I guess it's other than living in West Union, this is where my happiest years, I guess, have been. Just Elgin's always been known as being a real friendly town. And
Well kept, neat.
well kept. The property, they keep their property up, and it's just a good place to call home.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us about life in Elgin? Can you remember anything about the coffee cup?
Oh, yes. It's quartet practice down there a lot on Saturday nights.
Now, who was in the quartet?
Gordon Mosby and
Tad.
Tad Chori and Ruth Mosby.
Okay.
And they used to call them 3 hits and a miss.
3 hits and a miss?
3 men and a lady.
Oh. So the lady had to be the miss? Oh yeah. So I was thinking of you missed out something, but you're saying she was the miss,
So
MISS.
they called it 3 hits and a miss.
Okay. And what did they sing for?
Basically their own entertainment,
I
wasn't it?
think so.
And for anybody that was in the cafe would be there to listen.
And do you remember what Arlie was famous for in her cafe? Arlie, are you talking about when Arlie had the cafe, or
Yes.
Arlie Cliff?
And Cliff.
And Cliff, yes.
Mhm.
The pies were pretty well
Her
known.
pies. And Arlie never came out of the kitchen. She did all the cooking. And Cliff waited on the table and pushed cups of coffee over.
Spilled them on the way across.
Yes, that's right. He pushed out the coffee,
Yeah,
didn't
he
he?
pushed out the coffee.
But what I remember about Arlie, and maybe you don't, but she always was doing her crossword puzzles. And somehow that really sticks in my
Isn't
mind.
that funny?
That I can see her sitting there asking for what would this be or what would that be.
Oh, I just didn't remember that.
Okay, is there anything else that either one of you would like to share about Elgin before we close up?
Well, I remember going into John Tillotson's Hardware back in the late 50s, before we had a television at home. We didn't have one yet. And he would let us sit there and watch his display television, my brother and I, Ken and I. I really enjoyed that. You know, we don't do things like that now. It's just a Saturday evening we'd go down there, the stores were open, and he'd let us come in and watch TV.
The television is so much part of our lives now, it's hard to think that we've only had it, you know, about 40 years.
Basically, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But what did you do in your childhood before you had a TV at home to entertain it in the evening? A lot of houses had pianos, I think.
We had a piano, but
You didn't play it.
I didn't play it.
You didn't play it.
My older sister did. But
Did you? But now, did you have a piano after you and Ed were married?
No, we never did.
You never had a piano. He didn't need the piano because he could sing without it, huh?
Yeah, that's how I met him, was with the quartet that he sang with.
Well, you want to tell us about that?
Oh.
Maybe you'd rather not.
Well, no, I lived in an apartment in West Union, and Ruth Mosby rented an apartment just across the hall from me, and Ed was home from service, and the quartet came up to practice at Ruth's house, and
Excuse me, but that was World War II, right?
mm-hmm. And she brought Ed over and introduced him to me. And I was working on my Eastern Star books. And I said, well, I can't come over now. And they said, well, we'd like to have you come over and sing. And I said, well, I don't sing. But I said, I'll come over and listen afterwards. And so that's how I really met him. He was home on furlough, and Dave was getting together with their singing.
We were married not.
Then we married in August of 43. That was in January of 43 I met him. Of course, he went back into service, and then when he's home on furlough, Dr. Wolf brought him up to West Union. He had to come up to the hospital. He said he was neighbors of Ed's. Doc asked me if he'd like to go up to West Union, and he said yes, I would. So he told him on the way he stopped to see me, and just kind of hit and miss. But he asked me if I would write to him. I said when he went back to service, and I said I'll write if you write first, you know. Just perfectly disinterested.
Well, that's good. I think that's a nice way to close. And thank you very much for participating today.